So as an overview, as Roselle provided, we'll be going through my presentation first, and then we'll be going through questions and having some conversation together. And we'll also conclude with an activity that's kind of exploring the themes of today's workshop in a hands-on way. So to begin with, I wanted to share a bit about my personal motivations and technological perspective, especially as it might be different from some of you all here today. So the guiding force behind pretty much every initiative I take on, and especially my work with technology, is equity. Because when we think about technology, especially from my perspective as a young person, it is really the foundation of our futures, the foundation of how we access each other and opportunities. And equitable technology is, in my eyes, the foundation for building an equitable future. And for me, my passion for equity as a general concept is really rooted in my upbringing. I am a second generation Chinese American, and growing up in Albany, Oregon, which is definitely not the most diverse place. I've definitely faced comments, I've definitely faced questions growing up about my ethnic identity, about my Americanness, about my belonging that people around me simply didn't have to face. And hearing those things ever since I was young really heavily impacted how I perceived myself and my self-worth. And at the same time, I had a lot of privilege from my parents who were socioeconomically advantaged enough to provide me stable technology, to instill in me a value for education, and to help me through every issue that I needed in my life. And for me, this kind of bifurcated experience of both cultural inequity and racial inequity, as well as socioeconomic privilege, and my desire to bridge that gap between the opportunities that I was lucky enough to receive and the inequities that I had to face to get those opportunities is kind of what guides me through all my equity work, and especially my technological equity work, because the internet is a huge way that I've been able to discover my people, so to speak. That's allowed me to discover more about my cultural identity and history and become empowered and fully understand who I am and where I want to fit in this world. And related to that is just my identity as a young person. I was born in 2005. I'm a member of Gen Z, which means I have never lived in a time without ubiquitous internet and personal computers and mobile devices. And in other words, for every second that I've been alive, access to technology has been a critical way for me to access knowledge and opportunities and friends. And that's kind of the next pillar of my perspective with technology. And that for me, access to technology, both the devices and the knowledge provided by technology, have been my pathway to accessing the world. And especially as a public high schooler in a smaller town, there aren't a lot of opportunities to explore beyond here that are going to be handed to you. And basically everything that I've been able to do, from internships to scholarships to programs to opportunities like this with Oregon Humanities, those are all things that I've been able to find and receive because I looked for them rigorously online. And other words, access to opportunity for young people today, whether it's applying to college, submitting your assignments online, is really through the internet and through technology. And in that same vein, connecting with the globe and finding my place in not just my local community, but a truly global community has been completely dependent on my relationship with technology. Being able to connect with my family in China and being able to discover and learn about global languages and culture, and meeting a lot of my best friends across the world in the US without ever having met them in real life. Those are all connections that I personally could not have sustained without technology, and that have really shown me that opportunity, that connection, and that feeling at home in the world today has been indelibly intertwined with my experience and my privilege to access and understand technology. So in that vein, I also wanted to share a bit about how COVID-19 and online schooling has heavily impacted my experiences of technology as well, and how it's further shaped my perspective that technological equity is critical to global equity and to equity in pretty much every other area of life. And for context, when COVID shut down schools, I was 15 years old and I was a freshman in high school, and I am now a junior. So we had over 1 year of online school. At our school, we had around 6 hours of live Zoom classes for 4 days a week. And at our school, by the end of the year, we had quote unquote lost several students who basically stopped showing up to online classes. And online classes were undeniably difficult for everyone, but it was far more difficult for those of us who didn't have adequate access to technology, who didn't have parents at home who could help, who had parents who had lost their jobs. And for me, my privilege of being able to have stable internet, of having parents who were able to maintain their income source throughout COVID-19, that's what made COVID-19 somewhat, in a weird way, a good opportunity for me to gain opportunities that I otherwise couldn't access due to being far away from where I lived. For example, this opportunity to speak with you all today is probably something I couldn't have done if we were still in an all in-person setting, because Portland, where Oregon Humanities is based, is over an hour drive away from me. And in that way, seeing the disproportionate impacts and negative impacts of online schooling for communities that have traditionally been marginalized, while at the same time getting to experience opportunities that I would never have been able to experience before COVID, has made me more passionate than ever about bridging this technological gap. So, to provide some additional context of the work that I have done online and the opportunities I've been able to create and to access. During COVID-19, I started a nonprofit called The Worldliness, and we basically create youth for youth cultural awareness education programs. And we started really just by imagining what are some accessible solutions to cultural ignorance that we can enact on local and global scales. And because we were in an online setting, we were able to do camps and programs with students from 14 different countries. And that kind of intercultural connection and relationship building is just something that we couldn't have done if we were only in an in-person setting. And I've been able to work on this project with an incredible group of young volunteers from across the globe. And a lot of them I would consider my best friends, and I have never been able to meet them in real life. So, but the World in Us has truly been the most important learning experience of my entire life. And it is something that we were able to start and largely still facilitate in an online sphere. And in the same vein, Aster Lit is a international youth literary magazine and podcast that highlights diverse youth voices that I also was able to co-found during COVID-19. And again, because we were in this online setting, it allowed us to imagine new spaces and creative spaces for young emerging voices to shine in the adult and often Western-dominated world of literary publishing. And again, with our team of global youth, we met through an online intercultural exchange program. And the fact that we started this organization, we probably wouldn't have started it, honestly, if we had been in person and the experience was 2 weeks at the University of Iowa and back. Because we were in that online setting, we had already gotten used to meeting each other on Zoom, to meeting regularly in an online sphere, and just transferring our community and our ideas to a global scale felt much more accessible because we were in a internet-dominated world at that time. And so with that background on some of my volunteer experiences and my experiences just trying to create an accessible opportunities through online work, that is a heavy influence on my desire to get into research and to learn more about this field called human-computer interaction. And this field lies at the intersection of psychology, sociology, and computer science, and it basically is asking, how do people interact with technology? And how can we design technology to improve those interactions? And specifically, I was working with Professor Burnett at Oregon State University, and looking into inclusive software design, which, as the name suggests, seeks to find ways to make software itself more inclusive of people of all backgrounds and thinking styles. And the predecessor and kind of the pioneer in this inclusive software design work is this thing called GenderMag. And it's a cognitive walkthrough method, which basically means when someone is looking at a piece of technology, testing a software, they basically keep in mind certain facets and certain personas, and they try to think about how would different people use this piece of technology and how can we make it more accessible to these people of different cognitive and different life backgrounds. And with GenderMag, it seeks to identify and alleviate gender biases that are built into software, and in a word, it makes software more gender inclusive. And this project was co-led by my personal mentor at Oregon State University, as well as Anita Sarma. And as a general concept, a lot of people, I think today, do talk about the gender gap within jobs in the industry of technology, within the people we employ in technology. And for my research, a lot of it is more focusing on the impacts of that lack of diversity that are built into technology. So if we have, for example, data that represents high socioeconomic status people, that overrepresents men, for example, that overrepresents white people, then the products that we produce and the software that is produced from those settings is oftentimes more reflective of the needs and perspectives of those high socioeconomic status people, instead of the true diversity of all people who need to use technology. So with these kind of GenderMag and what we'll talk about next, which is SESMag, they're trying to look at technology that has already been created and alleviate those biases that may have already been created, that may have already been encoded into that technology when it was created, so that it can prevent future inequities from being embedded into technology. So with my work, building on GenderMag, my work focuses on socioeconomic inclusive technology and the impact of socioeconomic status on technology usage. So for context, socioeconomic status, or SES, is the social position and access to resources of an individual or community in relation to others. And it's typically conceptualized as being an intersection of education, income, occupation, and typically perceived factors of socioeconomic status, but it's also indelibly tied to countless other factors, such as environment, ethnicity, race, culture, wealth, and health, and many, many others. And with socioeconomic inclusive technology, it's basically recognizing that low SES people in particular are more likely to face issues with technology access because technology is expensive most of the time. With health, for example, having hearing or visual impairments that can make technology more difficult to use. There's also issues of literacy in the language that technology is created in, and literacy in how to use technology and navigate technology. And there's countless other factors that software developers who are typically high SES people might not normally consider. And with socioeconomic inclusive technology, it's just trying to create a software and a technology environment that's inclusive and accessible for all people. And that, of course, includes addressing issues that low SES people face with their technology. So, for example, socioeconomic inclusive technology will typically have affordable options. It might include assistive technology, and it will be culturally and linguistically responsive and inclusive. So, again, the work that I have focused a lot of my research on is called SESMag, which is short for the SES Inclusivity Magnifier. And like GenderMag, it's a walkthrough tool that seeks to make software more inclusive of people of all SES levels. And with this tool, it's basically identifying 5 primary facets that software developers can keep in mind as they walk through potential usages of their technology and as they're developing their technology to ensure that it's accessible to people of all SES levels. And of course, there are countless more factors that influence people's interactions with technology. But these are some of the main ones that we've identified that most software developers are able to keep in mind as they're creating their technology. So one of those facets is technology self-efficacy, and it's formally the perception of one's own ability to perform tech-based tasks. But basically what that means is when I open up my laptop, when I need to submit an assignment or open Zoom or do some other thing on a website or other technology platform, do I believe that I am more likely than not am able to complete that task successfully? Reliable technology access is another huge facet, and it's oftentimes the most intuitive one that we think about when we think about SES. So it's really just, do you have access to reliable devices and internet? Communication literacy and also education and culture are also heavy influencers in a person's experience of technology. So that includes not just fluency in the language of a technology system or a software, but that also includes understanding of vocabulary, of idioms, of cultural references, and some of that kind of tech-specific language that people throw around. Fourth aspect is perceived control, kind of similar to technology self-efficacy, except it's more focusing on the belief in one's ability to exert influence over technology outcomes. So a lot of that is also thinking, do you consider technology to be the decider of the positivity or negativity of your technological interaction, or do you think you are the one in control of your interaction with technology? And a final and very important factor is risk, privacy, and security, because SES affects how much free time people have and what level of security they have. So this facet basically refers to someone's willingness to take technological risks, and that ranges from trying new softwares to risking loss of privacy. And because this can all feel very conceptual, we'll start with a bit of an example that might be a bit more familiar in the world of accessible design as a whole. So sidewalk ramps were often first implemented with wheelchair users in mind, but they really benefit a whole lot of other people as well. For example, people who are walking, pedestrians, it makes it easier to get onto the sidewalk. For people who are riding bikes, it makes it easier again to cross the street. And accessible design broadly just seeks to create innovations that make resources more accessible and more usable to all people. And sometimes they're created with certain communities in mind, but their ultimate goal is to benefit as many people as possible. So with socioeconomic inclusive design, here's an example. So if we're thinking about social media, undocumented immigrants are often a group of a socioeconomic status group that isn't typically included in technology design processes. And they often face unique technology challenges related to privacy or security, as well as language and culture. So there are certain risks, of course, of deportation or arrest that will result in greater privacy concerns when sharing identifying information on social media. There's also, and if they were, for example, to have concerns about that privacy and they go to a help page about privacy settings, those help pages might use complex vocab and grammar structures in a language other than that individual's non-native language, which can be difficult to navigate. So a potential fix of that social media platform to be more socioeconomically inclusive would be to simplify the language structures used in help pages, and to make that platform available in multiple languages, and to create, for example, an intuitive pop-up menu when users register for their account to control their privacy settings. And these kinds of fixes would benefit not just undocumented immigrants, but also all people who are concerned with privacy, who come from diverse linguistic backgrounds. And this honestly also benefits the social media platform because now they're expanding their potential audience of users. And a last note that I wanted to touch on is this idea of asset-based design. It also extends to various other sectors. For example, here is community development. But basically, asset-based approaches seek to elevate the assets, or what a community already has, instead of starting from what a community needs, aka what a community lacks. And this is something that we're in an ongoing process of trying to integrate into SESMag, so that it's not just understanding what do low SES people need or what do they currently not have available to them, but instead understanding what resources do they already have and how can we elevate those so that these communities are able to autonomously elevate the things that they value most and create long-term solutions that are based in those communities themselves rather than in outside interventions.